always had kind of an interest in how things work in general. And so my first love was an engineer. So I went to school as an engineer, and I became a pretty decent electrical engineer, and I worked for many years in industry. But there was always something kind of nagging at me, which was like I would always read about scientists. I like science. I like the idea of discovery. And in engineering, it's kind of like you're discovering, but you're more like making things. And I kind of like the idea of discovery. And so when it's probably about 10 years after I was an engineer, I decided I quit everything and I went back to grad school. The company of Backyard Brains started because my partner and I would always go out and into schools. Tim was really passionate about explaining about how the brain works in particular, because he had a problem when he was younger with his hearing, and he didn't like the way the doctors were talking to him. And I didn't like the fact that when I was in school, no one came in and told me that you could become a scientist. And so we would, for many years, go out into classrooms and give talks about what we were doing in grad school. And I'd always end it by saying, you know, this is something that you can do. If you like doing Sudoku puzzles, if you like this type of stuff, you can actually become a scientist. And we started making these kits, going into schools, finding out that there wasn't stuff that we were doing in our lab we couldn't do in the schools because that stuff wasn't there yet. And so then we had this idea for the $100 spike project, which is, we had one summer we wanted to build this invention, and that's where Backyard Brains sort of came out of that. I didn't do this alone. This is really like a true partnership between my lab mate Tim Marzullo, who's now my business partner, and myself. And so I was more of the engineer, and he's more of the biologist. Backyard Brains, we're a DIY neuroscience company, and we try to make materials and experiments easy enough and thorough enough that when you're done with maybe about 2 or 3 experiments, you'll have a really good idea of how the brain works. And the brain works very simply that we have these senses that take in information, it turns the information into electricity or spikes, sends it to the brain processes it in a way which we don't yet understand, and then it sends out commands via also spikes to our muscles to allow us to move around and interact and talk and sort of eat and do everything we need to do to sort of support the brain. So I try to begin this this concept of kind of bringing down academic sciences into the hands of amateurs, because in other fields like in astronomy, and even in biology now, it's starting to get that way. There's a lot of amateurs that sort of contribute to the greater cause of like in astronomy, for example, the Hale-Bopp comet was discovered by an amateur, right? So there's no reason why that can't happen in neuroscience as well. So we want to begin this neural revolution, very much like the computer revolution in the 1970s, where you had, you could buy a computer in 1976, but you'd have to spend like, hundreds of thousands of dollars on it. But then with when the first PCs started coming out, the Altair 26,000, I can't remember what the model number was, you could now all of a sudden buy one for cheap, and then people started tinkering with that, and started, the Palo Alto support group, whatever it was, just started taking off, and then it spread like wildfire. There's no reason why we can't do that in other technical fields as well. So we're hoping that we're going to do that in neuroscience. You can't bring animals into a lab, into schools. Anything with a backbone is really heavily regulated, and it should be by the government for ethical reasons. And so the aha moment we had was that you can use insects, and insects have really, really similar neurons to ours. They both spike very, very similar spikes. I mean, the action potentials are really similar, and the way that they encode the information is very similar as far as rate coding goes. So, like the key principles of how the brain works are similar between insects and mammals. And so, by letting kids do these things with insects, they're actually learning a lot on how their brains work. one of the reasons why we chose to do a number of things with our company the way we did was to get other people sort of do the same thing. And so we would like to see more. When I was in grad school, we had all these really cool inventions that would just sort of sit there after people would graduate and then not sort of go into market because they would kind of go get a job with Intel or do some other type of stuff. And so there are a lot of neat inventions that could be brought to market if you just didn't do the traditional realm of doing things, which you kind of go on to, get a postdoc and you get a tenured position somewhere as a professor. But you get to also, an alternative way of doing it is sort of taking the inventions that you've made, sort of like starting your own companies and trying to market these and sort of like change the way that the science of your particular area is done, which is what we tend to do. And so what we've done to sort of help promote that was sort of like open up, we're an open finance company, so all of our books are online, so people can see all of our sales figures and understand exactly how it works. You can download all of our statements for the past years. My business partner Tim always likes to say that if you're not embarrassed of your prototype, that you've waited too long to sort of put it out there. And so so a lot of our early ones, and I think still on our website, a lot of them are still cobbled out of wood. And you can still see the hex nuts kind of screwed through there. And so that was the thing that I found was the most useful thing, which is like just get it out there and get people's feedback on it. And I think I think people find that a little bit disheartening. The fact that your stuff looks like crap if you don't, and like you're still giving it up like as a part of you that you're giving to them, that actually you don't have to wait for everything to be perfect. You can start selling immediately and start to get that that feedback that you're getting from your customers. I don't know. I feel in general we don't ask enough questions. I mean, if you look at the media discourse on pretty much any subject, it's just basic reasoning and not being able to accept what someone tells you. I mean, if it doesn't ring true, then you should probably look it up and do something about it. I think we're teaching science wrong. I mean, like it just seems like when the point of science to me is that you ask questions and you try to get data to answer those questions, right? It's not about like plants with lights. I mean, it seems like when you do science fair projects, I like the very simple questions. There was the one that I went to that I gave top prize. The kid was answering the question like, do people leave his, what was it? He was curious if people, like, what was the traffic flow around his neighborhood? He had a hypothesis that because the school is behind him, more people would be driving one way in the morning than at night. And he went out there and he would measure, and like that type of stuff to me, like that is the most important lesson that I think that kid can learn. It's like, if you have a question, you can go out there and look for the data that answers it, and you form a logical conclusion. It wasn't like discovering anything major, but it was like using that reasoning to sort of answer things. And I think in general, people, at least in our country, the United States, we tend to listen to people instead of trying to seek out those answers ourselves. I think in general, a better informed society on how the scientific process works would lead to better decisions.